Hello and welcome to The World is Our Cloister, the monthly podcast of the Irish Dominican Friars, where we let you glimpse a little of our life in the cloister, but also take a look at the world through a Dominican lens. Today we're talking fittingly about social media, what it is and how we are best to use it, how we are to engage with it as Catholics in the world today. Joining me in the podcast this month, we have Father Conor McDonough.
Hello.
That's great. You said, actually, we're nice for once, Father Conor. I said no, I said hello. And in a nice change of pace, we actually have Patrick Grant, affectionately known as Paddy G, who has come round the other side of the laptop. Usually he's busy recording and editing and all kinds of things, but we thought it would be quite fitting to have Patrick on as a guest.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you. I mean that honestly. Brothers, social media, it has become such a massive thing in the world today. You know, can you find anyone in the world who is not in some way engaged with social media? I think it's ubiquitous. You know, it's just become all encompassing for a lot of people. That presents challenges to us as Catholics. You know, Pope Benedict XVI, I remember in one of his writings, he encouraged us to use social media and the internet, you know, for the new evangelization. I suppose then, in short, how are we to view social media as Catholics in the world today? Who wants to jump in? We're all looking at Paddy because he's looking pensive and he has some very deep thoughts. You wouldn't think it from talking to him ordinarily.
No.
Yeah, a lot of the time, like, he does actually have deep thoughts.
Yeah, most of
I have to wheedle them out of it.
They're deep. They're deep down there. I have to pull them out. But how do we use social media as Catholics?
How are we to view it?
How are we to view it? I feel like it's a very good question. It's a very interesting question. And as a layman, I feel like I view it differently than maybe a religious might view it.
Oh, interesting. Why might that be?
Well, I don't know. I feel like lay people kind of almost Catholic lay people almost have a calling to be using it more for the church. I think personally, I think that it is mission territory, and we'll probably get into that more as we continue this conversation. But I do think that social media is mission territory. And I think that religious priests, sisters have their mission ground, and I think that's a very physical thing, especially for priests, you know, preaching mass, that kind of thing. But I think for lay people who might not necessarily have the tools to go out and do that, like stand up, public speaking, that kind of stuff, I think that we have an obligation to use social media for the glory of the Lord. As
a platform, almost, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, what you're saying is, like, so the preacher has, you know, I suppose in the broad sense, he has the street corner and he has, you know, wherever he can, you know, preach the gospel everywhere and so on. Primarily or principally, I suppose, in the church from the pulpit, you're preaching the word of God in the context of the liturgy, which is a platform that is not afforded to lay people. Is what you're saying. That's an interesting take. Yeah. I suppose so. Your platform, where you can reach, you know, the wider world, is easily accessible, free, and like universally, like reaches.
Well, I think it comes from, like, that's not to say that lay people can't have, you know, go to the street corner and preach. I think that like obviously there's lay missionaries that do mission work and preach, and that's wonderful. But I think nearly everybody in the world has social media at this point. And if we're not using our social media for the glory of the Lord, then I think that it is going to just impact us in a negative way, because again, like we'll get into it more, but there's social media has so many voices, that it's our job to be a joyful noise in such a noisy world, to be a light in such a what can be a dark place,
and not just contribute. Sorry, Father Conor is like chomping at the bit, but I'm holding him back, you know, because I have so much to say. I just wonder, like, off the back of your point, like, are we not just contributing to the noise? Now, I'm just playing devil's advocate, really, but how do we avoid, I suppose, just contributing to the noise? that you mentioned, because you're
Yeah.
right. You know, there's a cacophony.
Yeah.
It's a good word for you. I see
Yeah.
Father Connor scribbling it down. Cacophony. Of
Word of the day, Chris. That was on your calendar today.
Oh,
wasn't
stop. Oh, you got me that for Christmas there, Robert. But what are we concluding, you know, in regards to how we're viewing social media? Is it somewhere we're to spend all of our time? Leading question alert.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm.
We surely have to view it as, you know, a tool, because it can be used. I think that's a great point, Paddy, that you brought up about it being the platform for the laity. Interesting point as well about how it's more so for the laity than for the priests and religious. But it must be used. It must be used in that way. I will confess that personally, I don't use it. Right now, the reason why is because I think I know myself. I know I have somewhat of an addictive personality.
Sure.
So, for instance, what I am addicted to is chess on my phone.
Yeah.
Right, I know I will play that. You know, if I don't limit it, I'll probably spend all
Minutes.
my time.
Whole minutes.
But whole minutes. But I like the other day, I think I lifted the phone and I started up a game of chess, and only kind of as it was starting did I realize what I was doing and become conscious of it.
Yeah.
Like, surely it's a massive danger with social media to just mindlessly scroll through things, you know.
Definitely. Well, I think that, yeah, like it definitely can be a danger. And like, I want to go back as well and say that, you know, your point of like, I want to say that priests and religious can use social media. And I think that it's wonderful when they do, because it's such a, like there's so many voices that it's almost necessary for religious to kind of be using it. But I think that it's just different. They should be using it in a more limited way, and there's more structure. I don't know, Father Connie.
Patrick's clawing back there because he's employed by the Dominicans to run our social media. So if we leave social media, Patrick's out of a job. So nice save, Patrick.
No, but I do think that when, like with all things, prudence, you know, so like when we aren't using social media prudently and we're intaking way more than we're actually putting out, then it does become more of a problem. And that's not to say that we should spend all of our day putting out content either.
No.
Like people have jobs, but I think that social media can be a powerful tool for the lay people and for religious. But I think it can be a powerful tool. But again, prudence is necessary, especially when it comes to intaking media. Like I go every single day, I think about deleting Facebook, Instagram. Like every day, I have the thought at least once or
Apparently
twice.
It's quite difficult, is it?
It's very difficult.
They don't let you leave.
It's addictive. But also, I know deep down that, like, I feel particularly called to be a different voice, an opposing voice to what the rest of the world is.
Yeah, I suppose if someone sees me or Father Connor on Instagram or Facebook or whatever it might be, they'll say, "Okay, priest." So clearly going to be something about God. Whereas if they see Patrick Grant, you know, cool, hip, young guy. Is that the way we're supposed to describe it?
Exactly.
Okay, great. Is that in his contract? Cool, hip, young guy. You know, I was like, oh, he's actually talking about the Lord in a positive way. He's actually talking about his faith. Maybe it's worth listening to. Maybe it's an alternative to the usual stuff that I get fed into.
Sure.
But the prudence thing is super duper important, because prudence, St. Thomas tells us, is in the mind, right? So we have to have a purpose to all of our actions, you know. Absolutely. All of our actions should be purposeful. When I lift my phone and just mindlessly start a game of chess, what am I doing it for? You know, what's the end in view of my actions? So when we lift, whatever it might be, or when we engage with social media, that's good. But as long as we have a purpose in mind, you know, as long as we're not just mindlessly scrolling. Or whatever, you know?
Which I think so many people use social media as an escape. And I think that's the dangerous thing is, you know, like I feel like escapism and like people, it was much harder for people to escape. They were forced to live in the real world when social media wasn't as prevalent. Whereas now escapism is kind of everywhere. Like we have so many forms of just being able to escape and just mindlessly turn off because social media is such a huge problem. But I think that there's so many, you know, problems, anxiety, mental health, all that kind of stuff. So people are looking for more ways to switch off. And I think it just becomes a vicious cycle.
You're saying, I'm trying to look for another word. Something to do with what's the contrary of judicious? Injudicious use of social media might contribute in a negative way to people's mental health, state of mental health, is what you might be saying. I think you'd be backed up by an awful lot of research if that's what you're saying.
Even recently, there's some new research that's come out,
Yeah.
and of course there'll be all kinds of, massive corporations who have a vested interest in saying that the kids are all right, everything's fine, that social media isn't playing a part in this. But I mean, just recently I was reading something, and there's strong correlations between heavy social media use and mental health problems, and also things like loneliness. I mean, young people finding it difficult actually to make friends, and not actually spending a lot of physical time with their friends. But I might just say, Paddy said something really interesting. Just the point, I wasn't expecting to make that point about lay people having access to this platform. And we filmed a video recently that just went out on YouTube a while back about a priest called Father Patrick Peyton, who put immense effort, the Rosary Priest, exactly, and he put huge effort
into Instagram.
Not Instagram. He would have, if he was around today, he'd be all over Instagram. But he put huge work into radio and TV and film.
Oh yeah.
But it was as a kind of full-time professional thing. Yeah. He had to put huge energy into this. He had to convince all these network executives, convince all these celebrities to get involved. There was a really, really massive effort. But Patrick's point is that, actually in social media, anybody can do this, and sometimes you can actually reach a pretty wide audience, which you couldn't have done if before, unless you were doing this kind of thing full time. And that, I suppose, it's the quality, kind of what kind of attitude do you have in what kind of stuff are you putting out? As you say, is it something that is going to be attracting people to the faith? Is it something that's going to be repelling people? And then what kind of stuff are you taking in? And I think the big thing is, if you don't have an interior life, a rich interior life, and if you don't have a life of prayer, in other words, if you're constantly distracted and constantly escaping from reality and constantly escaping from God and yourself, then ultimately you're not going to be putting out good stuff on social media. You're not drawing from a deep well. That well is just drying up. So it's like this constant challenge, being there and putting really good and attractive and beautiful stuff there to draw people to the Lord. But the more you're there, the riskier it is that you're going to, the greater the risk that you're going to have a weaker interior life, and so you've got to strengthen that, I think.
The interesting thing about that video, the Father Patrick Peyton video, is I was thinking about this, and I was talking to Father Connor a bit about this as well in preparation for this episode. You
did preparation for this episode?
I just thought about it. I know, can you believe that?
Nobody's ever done any preparation.
I'm the first, I think. But
it's been mostly Dominicans. That's the explanation.
But at the end of the video, then one of the closing lines is something along the lines of, if Father Patrick Peyton were around today, then think of all the people he'd reach through social media. And I was just thinking about that line in particular, and how I was like, yeah, man, how great would that be? And then I was like, okay, but there's tons of priests and religious that are doing that on social media. I think of Father Sam French, is it? The ginger guy?
Australian,
Father Mike Schmitz. There's plenty of
Bishop Barron.
There's plenty more that we could shout out. Irish Dominicans.
Oh yeah, of course.
But
I subscribe.
But the problem is that there's so many more voices. At the time, Father Patrick Peyton was he had the resources. He was able to get a platform. He was able to be okay, I have this contact, I'm going to get on the radio, and everybody listened to the radio at the time. So it was easy for lots of people to hear what he had to say, because he had the resources and the ability to get onto the air. Whereas now everybody has the ability to go online and say whatever they want. So while I do think that Father Patrick Peyton today would have had a lot of things to say, and probably would have done a lot of good, I think that the danger now is that there's so many other people as well, so your voice just gets lost. So I think that even if the content and the quality of the content is really, really high, really good, then you can still see that you might not be performing in terms of numbers and analytics and stuff like that, because people are addicted to TikTok and their algorithm and whatever it is, and so they might not be seeing your thing come up because there's 101 other people that are saying the same thing or a different thing, and so it just gets lost. So I think that it kind of, while there's lots of people that want to say good things, and it's easy to get lost in so many voices.
One figure that nobody has said yet, and I'm kind of hurt about it, is Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who was along the same lines as Father Peyton, this massive televangelist, but Catholic to the core, and actually he had a profound effect on so many people, myself included, to the point, fun fact, that I considered taking Fulton as my religious name.
There's still time, Chris.
No, there's not. No, I'm
Father
done.
Fulton.
Do it. I took Vincent
Fulton
Fair,
Galt. No one would believe you're Catholic with a name like Fulton Galt.
Well, you know the fun fact about Fulton, how he got that name?
No.
Okay, so side note, but whatever. He was born, as most people are, and Fulton was actually his mother's name. His mother's maiden name. Yeah. Wow. So whatever busyness was happening as he was being born and whatever else, and the nurse, apparently, or the midwife, said to his maternal grandfather, "What is the name?" Yeah. Meaning, what is the child's name to be? But he thought she meant, "What is my name?"
Yeah.
So he said, "Fulton." Oh, no. The name is Fulton.
Oh no!
And so she wrote Fulton apparently on his birth certificate.
Oh
his baptismal name is actually Peter.
Really?
Yeah,
no
yeah. Peter Sheen. But it's one of those names that stuck.
Yeah.
Like,
wow.
I don't know, like some examples of.
But another fun fact about that name. Do you know the actor Martin Sheen?
Yes. So his name is, wait, can I ruin it for you? Villegas or something?
Estevez.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
But he took the stage name Martin Sheen after, I think it's Martin de Porres. Right. Saint Martin de Porres, our Saint Martin, and Fulton Sheen, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway,
you are not
way
mistaken.
off track. We're way off track.
Way off track. Sorry.
We didn't prepare for this episode.
Preparations were made. There are points that I want to summarize. So it's a tool. We can use it.
Yep.
Good point about like the difference between laity and religious, let's say, branching them all into one broad umbrella. It's detrimental to mental health if it's used, here's this word again, injudiciously. Yeah. Can I ask why that is? Is it because people are just, or people tend to use it as escapism? Is that the only reason? Or, because I think, Father Connor, your point about the interior life is really important. Does a use or an injudicious use of social media take away from our interior life?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it's not the only reason I think it has an effect on people's mental health, but I think it is part of it, that if you have a kind of a space within yourself where you're processing lots of your experiences and so on, and you're able to sit with your thoughts and to think through all these different things and balance up everything that's happening in your life, you can come to some sort of an equilibrium. Whereas if you're not developing that space within yourself at all, and if you're unreflectively, mindlessly, thoughtlessly, just in a reflex kind of a way, going to this comforting thing which isn't actually remotely solving your problems or helping you grow in wisdom or just helping you just process anything at all, then you're failing to develop a muscle that's going to be really, really important. And I think, ways in which then to develop that interior life, number one is just to limit your use of social media. Sure. And I think maybe we might talk about that practically, how people can do that. Yeah. But I think it's a really good practice to have times of fasting from social media. Advent is a great time to do it. Lent is a great time to do it.
Fridays,
for example. Maybe, yeah. And you can deactivate, delete, whatever, switch off, but just some way in which, or particular times of the day. So I'm not going to use it before breakfast, I'm not going to use it after such and such a time, or spaces as well. I'm not going to use it in my room, I'm going to use it in these places instead. All these different ways in which we can limit it, and limiting that reflexive action opens up these spaces then for something a little bit more reflective, where I might actually say, well, I'm going to go for a walk. Or I'm going to read a novel. And reading a novel is just such a different thing. It's so much richer and more imaginative, and you're involved in it more kind of creatively as a reader than somebody who's just scrolling through short 20-second videos.
You're not being acted upon, I think. Like with a novel, it's kind of inert until you act on it. You're a part of your mind, Whereas when you open up social media, it starts to act on you, and you become passive. And I think, like, going back to being like intentional in what we do in everything, like having an intention, being conscious of what our intention is. I think if we start to passively scroll, we forget why we even picked up the thing in the first place or engaged with it and so on. Good practical points, I suppose, to consider, Father Connor, with regards to space and time and fasting from social media. And those are necessary because they curb some negative effects which may appear, but there are obviously benefits as well. So I'm sure both of you have good news kind of stories or good experience with social media that you could share, being in charge of the Irish Dominican online presence at the minute. I don't have any because other than the fact that this podcast gives me tremendous joy and really nourishes my interior life.
Good, glad to hear it. And that of thousands of others, Chris.
Well, of course, it's not all about me.
No, but I think I might just share on that because I have a few little kind of little glory stories which I think are pretty cool. I was at a Youth 1000 retreat a while back giving a workshop on social media, and a few guys there actually said that they'd come to faith during the COVID lockdowns on their own, without the support of their families, without any kind of background on the faith, totally independently through TikTok.
Wow.
They had seen these videos and then they just went a little bit deeper and downloaded like a Bible study on their phone and started reading scripture. And I mean, I'm finding that especially with young men, this is something I've seen. I mean, I can think of about like 7 or 8 completely independent examples in different schools in different parts of the country, different retreats, where a guy comes up and he says, my family doesn't practice, I just discovered all of this and it's really, really beautiful, and I want to know more. So sometimes it'll be it might be like listening to somebody like Jordan Peterson or somebody like that, or even somebody like Joe Rogan, kind of helping them to question what they're being told as kind of mainstream, like what's mainstream orthodoxy in society. They question all of that, and then they might find somebody like there's kind of like this Syrian Orthodox bishop, the guy who got stabbed in Sydney recently. So I met like about 3 guys, 3 guys who kind of started watching him on TikTok, and then now they're like, one of them is in a school. He came to the chaplain and said, can we set up a prayer group in the school? I think that's a brilliant thing, because that's like the crucial next step is, are you going to live it out in the flesh? Because it's not enough to stay online, but are you actually going to live it out in the flesh, in your local community, with other brothers and sisters in the flesh? Because if not, if it's a purely online thing, it risks just being kind of a purely, I don't know, kind of a spiritualized or intellectual Christianity that's not actually lived out in an embodied way. But yes, I would say I've met quite a few people who came to the faith through online stuff and are in a very good position now thanks to that. And I never would have predicted that. It's surprising to me, but it's there. It's a reality.
That's interesting. Yeah, I actually said I have no positive stories to share, but that's not true, because last year we travelled down to Brother Boage's alma mater, his old school, the name of which I'm forgetting, but it's in Carlow. CBS? Is it CBS in Carlow? So. Okay. And when we gave a kind of a presentation and like introduced ourselves to, the 6th form, I think they were, if I remember correctly. And,
6th year, Chris is from the north. So.
Whatever. We actually have 2 6th forms in the north as well.
Upper 6th.
We have like lower and upper 6th. There's no 7th form. That's just
ridiculous.
Yeah, anathema.
6 years.
6 years.
Or for you North American listeners, grade 12.
Grade 12, exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Paddy slips in at every opportunity that in fact he's Canadian. But just let it drop now. People don't really care. We went to Brother Boage's old school, and usual reception was generally positive. But one lad came up to us afterwards and told us that he had just discovered, I think randomly, something like Pidens with Aquinas or something. Shout out to Matt Rad. That and he had just started watching the videos, and a bit like you're saying,
totally.
God can use this. Yep. God can use all these things to touch someone's heart. He chooses to use these things. He doesn't have to actually go that way. He can go any number of ways. He can go directly into the heart. That happens all the time. You think of St. Paul, for instance, on the road to Damascus. But he chooses a lot of the time to use these things, like secondary causes, we might call them, right? In order to reach someone's heart, which I suppose is an encouragement for us to use them, to pray that the Lord will work through us. But it has to be said as well that it's no replacement for the person-to-person contact or the preaching in the church. It's a good tool, I suppose, for, in the ordinary way of things, to prepare someone, like you say, for.
I know that after this most recent Sikh conference in the States, then I definitely noticed there was a lot more kind of Catholic social media influencers, content creators. Because a lot of people just started recognizing, okay, like God has given me a gift to be able to create, and like I have an eye for it, and I'm just going to use it. I feel really convicted to use it. And because of them, then I was like, okay, I know that I'm working for the Dominicans and doing like content for them, but like I'm not doing anything on my own, which is why I personally feel very convicted to make my own content that glorifies God. And so it was around Lent that I was like, I'm going to do like daily gospel reflections. And it was challenging. Props to priests having to come up with a daily sermon flip. But like doing that, and you know, it's hard to kind of know sometimes between the numbers and comments and likes, like, is this reaching anyone? But there was a couple of people that were like, oh, could I send this on to, you know, so and so, like, I'm really enjoying these, and somebody just recently told me that they, you know, want to learn more about scripture, so I'm going to send this on to people. And those kinds of stories are just like, you know, it makes you realize that, you know, that initial, again, like, then you just kind of have to pray. All you can do is put it out there, pray that it has an impact on somebody's life, and then the Lord will put somebody into their life that can further expand on that. You just kind of, like, honestly, like, with social media as a tool, like you said, then like, I think that it's our job, like I said at the beginning, to put something out there that is upbuilding, wholesome, glorifies God, and then pray that it impacts somebody in a positive way, and that somebody will come in to fill that physical aspect.
That it just kind of pave the way for that. What are the best ways, though, brothers? Because, you know, from what you're saying, and again, admittedly, my experience of social media is quite limited. What is it about the general drift of social media posts that is not so wholesome? And what is the best way, like, concretely to conquer? Is it things like gospel reflections? Is it putting up nice pieces of chant? You know, is it other things like interviews, or you know, is it all of the above? You know?
Yeah, I think there's really, you know, you can be just super upfront about it. And like so I started doing the gospel reflections, and I was like, for Lent, I'm just going to be super straight up about just posting content that is very intentionally Catholic. And I talk about Jesus and his love for us every day, like the charisma at its core. But then afterwards I was like, okay, I still want to be posting content. What can I do? And so I've started doing movie reviews. Like, I love watching movies. So I'm like, okay, every week I'm going to tell people what to watch and why I think they should watch it, and maybe some themes. And so one of the more recent ones I did was A Quiet Place. Because John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, and I like both very liberal people, but I think it is one of the most conservative movies recently. Like the message of fatherhood and family, the importance of fatherhood and family, I think is incredible, and told in such a unique way. And so, you know, just including that, so it's a bit more discreetly Christian. So I think that it is all of the above, like you said. Like, you can be more kind of oblivious about it, but I think in the end, you know, it's just being a witness, a joyful witness to God, and just being, you know, so that people, you know, if you're walking down the street and they're like, oh, that guy's different, he's happy, you know, everyone around him is depressed and sad. It's, you know, just being that on social media, where like people are, you know, being sarcastic or using really inappropriate humor, or so on and so forth.
You're answering the first part of my question, which was like, why is it so unwholesome? Why is it, for instance, that, like, going back to what we said earlier about the state of mental health, so background context, I recently, I suppose within the last year, read a very, very good book by a scholar who's, I don't think, any Christian in any way, called Jean Twenge, called iGen. So she cuts off after 1995, when the internet became commercially available. Anybody who was born after that time, she terms iGen. Okay, it loosely overlaps with Gen Z.
Sure.
And she examines, and she has done research. I think her research is over decades on how their mental health has developed. You know, in the last, say, like 10, 15, even 20 years. And it comes into things like their making of friendships, and a lot of the parameters. And she does put it down to, you know, the advent of the smartphone, and really, it's down. That's why she calls it iGen. But a lot of that has to be, you know, due to the influence of social media as well. You know, the TikTok, you know, going on Instagram instead of phoning my friend and having an actual conversation face to face. So I suppose I'm now answering my own question, in that if social media is only there as a substitute for person to person interaction, which is what we're really made for, not only with each other but with the Lord, then it's going to leave a hole.
Yeah.
Or it's not going to fill the hole anyway that we want it to fill.
I think the main problem with social media is comparison. You know, comparison is the thief of joy. You log on to Instagram and you see, you know, these people that are way more attractive than you, or like way smarter than you.
It's never happened to me.
Or
it's never happened to me either. But that's because I don't use it.
You know, and the list goes on and on and on. And, you know, I think of like my wife, and, you know, we're constantly sending each other, you know, reels on Instagram about like, this is how to raise a baby, or this is how to raise a baby. And it's like, okay, this is when God blesses us with a child, this is how we're going to raise a baby perfectly, because this is how this family does it perfectly. But then there's some that are like, oh, you know, I had a baby and I was horribly depressed. And so then it gets you starting to think, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a baby and be horribly depressed. And so then, you know, you just start comparing yourself to others, and you just have to be like, okay, no, everyone has their own experiences. Just allow me to experience my life as it is. But because you have all these outside influences, then it's way harder. And it might not be, you know, the kind of influences that you want or are trying to surround yourself with. Because in community, you know, you can be intentional and you can choose what community you surround yourself with in person. But on social media, then it's impossible to just choose exactly who you want to listen to, you know.
Is that because
can
of the
try.
algorithm?
Yeah.
This thing. So how do you get around that?
Well, it depends on the app. Like YouTube, I'd say you can be more specific and you can subscribe to who you want to subscribe to.
Oh, okay. Subscribers.
But, you know, Instagram and TikTok, I think, is a lot more different, because you do follow people, but then you're getting a lot of things based on what you follow, and it might not totally line up with the people that you followed with in the first place.
Sure.
I'm
about your question about being kind of friends, and then this is a replacement of that kind of friendship. I'm just thinking of something I used to do in Knockadoon in the early days of smartphones, when all these kids were on kind of Snapchat, but there was kind of a signal issue down in Knockadoon in the summer camp that we were on.
Great.
So they actually couldn't access it. And they were getting all their friends at home. They gave them the login details so they could keep up their Snapchat streaks. If that means nothing to you, don't worry about it. But
it's nothing to me.
But the really interesting thing we would do at the end of the week, we would do a workshop with some of the kids there, and invite them to think about their own use of social media. And they would all say that when we did this little thought experiment, they all said they would rather live in a world without social media. Every single one of them. And
that's
yet
interesting, isn't it? But
they wouldn't give it up for the world.
Because
why? Because all their friends are there. The different thing is, when they're in Knockadoon with all their friends in the flesh, they experience life in a different way. They experience themselves in a different way. It's this thing of like, this is my life. You kind of grow into your kind of a dignity. This is my life. I have freedom. I have intelligence. I have a body. I have a soul. And you kind of gain a sense of yourself, which you lose. And it's actually, Blessed Carlo Acutis has just been announced that he's going to be canonized. Fantastic. He had a fantastic line which is so applicable to the internet age, that we are born originals and we tend to become photocopies. And he says, how do we maintain, like his challenge is to maintain originality, and we don't do it by spending tons of time on social media. We do it in other ways.
Because naturally, I suppose, you know, just imbibing all of these things, again, largely passively, you're just naturally going to start, or unconsciously, you're going to just to conform yourself to what you're seeing, because you think that's on the screen, so I have to. I remember a friend of mine as well, like, just with regards to Snapchat, a friend was working as a counsellor in a secondary school, and she said that, you know, so much of her day was taken up with these Snapchat disputes among teenage girls. Right. You know, such and such didn't, I don't know, like my Snapchat, like or send me another Snapchat back or whatever. However it works, I don't understand. But it's like, it could be used as well maliciously as a way to hurt the other person. And I just thought to myself, good grief, you know. Like,
you grew up without, like, so when you were in secondary school, there was none of this around, was there?
I am still very young. Right. Just to let everybody know.
Yes.
But no, I'm trying to think. I first joined Facebook when I was in university.
Exactly.
I didn't have it in school, I don't think. Definitely there was no such thing as Instagram
or smartphones or anything like that.
No, because smartphones didn't. What was it? iPhone was the first, wasn't it? In like 2011 or something like that.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, I was already in college then. Like,
but I mean, I remember like stuff would happen in school, and you might be like churned up thinking about it. Yeah. But I would walk home from school, I had no headphones. I had no smartphone, and you would literally just process it. And you might even turn to prayer. I remember like very often I'd be praying on my way home, just talking to God about whatever had happened. And that's where the development happens. And it's what doesn't happen when you just have this reflex thing of going to social media or to headphones or whatever.
We at the conventional mass this morning, Father Patrick, who is the Polish chaplain here at St. Saviour's, he preached about the Jesus prayer, and he's a massive runner. Okay, he runs like every day. He's run like
20 kilometers, like
crazy. Like he's run like 50 marathons or something. And he says that, you know, I remember actually asking him one time, do you not listen to music? Do you not? And he said very simply, no, I just pray. And he said today in his homily that it was the Jesus prayer that keeps him going in the running, you know, just again and again and again. And he finds it real.
It's so funny because like I literally just saw somebody sent, because I've been running as well, and somebody sent me a video.
He said before he was going to try and get that in. Like,
no,
I'll just edit this part out.
Okay, trying to run. But like I've been trying to run, and so somebody sent me a video, and they were like, it was all about running, and you know, when you like, so when I go for a run, then I just think, and they were like, no, you plug in music because you're in pain and you don't want to think about the running. But you know what Father Patrick does is the opposite of that. Like he does the running, turns it into a prayer, instead of like what we do and trying to escape. It's like, okay, I recognize running is a good thing, but I don't want to have to think about life, or I don't want to have to think about the fact that I'm running and my body hurts. I want to escape from the fact that I'm doing a good thing. And so we listen to music, or we turn on a podcast, because I think people are just afraid to be left alone with their thoughts. Again, I think it's a cycle, like, because they've been listening to so many opinions on TikTok or Instagram, and so then they're like, okay, what do I think about? And then, you know, all of a sudden they're flooded with all these opinions, and they don't know which one is right or where they align with it, and it just becomes so messy that they just have to tune it out.
And I think it's really important to say this isn't just a problem for younger people.
No,
it's not just a problem for non-Catholics.
Not at all.
Among very devout Catholics, it can be a real issue. That, you know, they're taking in huge amounts of social media. Even if it's all Catholic news and it feels very pious and devout, it can take up tons of time. It can be a distraction.
Absolutely.
And actually it can really get in the way of prayer and spiritual growth. And I think it's something that we have to be very careful not to kind of be pointing fingers at other people and all that kind of stuff, that it's something that affects every single one of us. And we have to be attentive ourselves to that.
Again, I know that's what would happen to me. So I just don't want to go down the road, to be honest. Like,
I think that, like, we can, you know, like I was saying, lay people should be posting positively on social media, using it as a platform, as a tool for evangelization. I think that there is a way that you can negatively use it as a Catholic as well. Like, obviously intaking, like we talked about earlier, but also posting. Like, there is a way that you can negatively impact the church as a Catholic by posting, you know, stuff that isn't upbuilding or isn't wholesome
or isn't prudent.
Isn't prudent. Exactly. Like, it can be divisive. You know, so we have to be careful about that, and you have to be prudent about what you're posting. Like, is this going to divide, or is this going to bring together and foster community?
And the importance, I suppose, as well, has to be said, the importance of silence, which you did allude to, Father Connor, because, you know, without silence you won't have an interior life. And you know, it will, you know, your interior life, such as it is, will be fraught with anxiety and become, you know, fittingly, Bishop Barron described this one time, I remember in a clip, as the monkey mind, you know, like just jumping from tree to tree to tree to tree. Whereas it takes discipline, you know, to have an interior life, to, you know, say, to go into a church and you say, I'm going to pray for 30 minutes, and you will get distracted, and you'll be fighting it, and you'll be bored and restless and all the rest. But over time, you know, you do adapt to it. Whereas the 30 minutes spent scrolling probably won't contribute all that much to your,
not at
you
all.
know, and you know. So I think, like, if we're going to summarize, you know, I think we can say that social media is a good thing, a good tool for us, which God has ordained, because it's been taught from the magisterium that we should use it to reach people that we couldn't reach before. But we have to be judicious in how we use it ourselves. We have to remember that we're built for interpersonal communion. We need things like silence. We do need a certain amount of discipline when we use social media.
No, I think that's I what I would say is as well that the church has immense resources that we can draw on in this area, and I saw this recently. Where did I see it? On Instagram. But it was a church in Amsterdam, I think, and it was jam packed with hip young people like Patrick here, and what they'd done was they'd left their phones at the door. So it was this experiment that the church was doing to kind of draw people in, and inside in the church they could like draw pictures, they could play board games. Like the church was just full of all this activity. I don't think it was a Catholic church, but that idea of the church inviting people in to kind of plug out from the matrix of social media and engage with people differently. And I know as well of a group of like Belfast evangelicals who are trying to, so you kind of evangelical Protestants, they're realizing this is a bit of an issue. They don't find resources for dealing with it in their own tradition. And so some of them are going to a monastic community not too far from Belfast, seeking advice from them and practices how to actually begin to pray contemplatively, how to actually live kind of, incorporate more silence into their days. There's a yearning for that. And I think it's kind of an opportunity for us as well. Okay, it's hard for younger people to enter into silence, hard for people generally to enter into silence now, but the church has a powerful tradition in this respect, and maybe we need to start inviting people into it, practice silence together, inviting people on little silent retreats, or even, I mean, we had a group of young guys actually in this room that we're recording it in, and we did an Easter Triduum retreat, and part of it was that we went up to Glendalough and did a silent hike on Holy Saturday, just to enter into the silence of Holy Saturday. And it was so funny. One of the guys there, who's a super guy, shout out Prince if you're listening, but Prince said, can I presume I can listen to music when I'm up there? I was like, no, you listen to the birds. But so we had the silent hike, and it was actually a really transformative experience. And those guys said when they came, then we kind of descended into Dublin, went to the Easter Vigil, and they said their hearts were so ready to hear all those readings. So I think we can really do a lot on that front.
I don't want to sound all hippie, but like, you see birdsong,
totally,
it's just like, if I go out into the garden and just listen to the birds, like that's something that the Lord has just naturally kind of programmed into creation, and it's so restorative. It's just wonderful,
especially now in our garden, because there's no magpies. Somebody shot all the magpies, thank God.
But
now we have
no
all
magpies.
We have all these beautiful tiny little birds, and they're just singing the most amazing stuff. It's super. It's just gorgeous. It is gorgeous.
Now we're getting into grounding, and that's just a whole different podcast.
What's grounding? Is that touch grass? Is that what people?
Yeah, okay. Kinda.
I do that too.
You what?
Okay, no, we better end. So. I think actually the good place to end, because we mentioned about resources, and of course you can find plenty of resources on the Irish Dominicans website, YouTube channels, Instagram, TikTok.
Not TikTok.
We're not on TikTok.
No.
Patrick
Facebook,
will edit this
Twitter, Spotify. What else? Who else have we sold our soul to?
I should know what we're on. We can also, and I should say this because Patty tells me off for not saying it every time, but we should encourage you to engage and comment, and we can perhaps open up a kind of a dialogue if you have things to share, things you'd like to say. Thank you very much for joining us. I suppose I should thank my guests, Father Conor McDonough and Mr. Patrick Grant, Media Manager at the Irish Dominicans. And well, that's the other way they can join you, or they can reach you. Media Manager OP?
Yep, Media Manager OP at gmail.com.
Okay, Media Manager OP at gmail.com. That's what radio presenters, they always repeat the thing.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Spell that out for us.
No. Thank you very much for joining us in this episode of The World is Our Cloister. We'll see you next month. God love you.